Stories bigger than Texas, the Alamo podcast. As we celebrate Independence Day next week here in the United States, Texas has a special connection to the 4th of July. Today we reveal how the path to statehood prompted Texas to have its own 4th of July, why the young republic chose to join the United States, and the hidden Texas symbol you can spot in the United States flag. I'm your host, Emily Balcom. We're once again joined by Ernesto Rodriguez, the Alamo Senior Curator, Historian, and Lecturer. Thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Always a pleasure.
Before we get to the importance of July 4th to Texas statehood, let's set the groundwork. Even in 1836, when Texas had just won independence from Mexico, Texans are voting to join the United States. Why would Texas trade its hard-fought status as an independent nation to become part of the U.S.?
Well, when you think about what has just occurred, they had just come out of a war with a larger nation. And what's one thing people want? Safety. You want security. And the United States could offer that. Unfortunately, many in the United States didn't want Texas to be annexed. We went through a time of struggle because there was conflict whether or not Texas could join the Union through the proper means. People did not want it because it would come in as a slave state. Others didn't want it because it would cause other problems. So Texas was left on its own as a republic for about 10 years.
Well, the flip side of my question is, why does it take 10 years for annexation to happen?
Well, the thing is, it's slavery is one of them. You know, if Texas comes in, it's going to be a slave state, and that's going to cause problems because the nation is already divided. And if you add another slave state, especially one as large as Texas is going to be, it's going to throw off the balance of power. The other thing is there's always a fear of a war with Mexico. Mexico never really recognizes Texas independence. It's not until prior to annexation that they actually admit that, okay, well, go ahead and do this. You know, Texas is an independent nation. But they have rules to that. And it's like, you join the U.S., all bets are off. The biggest issues are whether or not it comes in as a slave state and whether or not the United States is ready to go to war with another nation.
As Texas remains a republic, what's taking place behind the scenes to pave the way for annexation?
So there's several attempts for us to join the Union. First one, 36. Then in 38, there's another attempt. And then in 1844 is one of the bigger pushes. And it gets all the way to Congress, where the United States is actually, they vote, and the Senate that refuses it. But elections are really interesting things. And there's an election coming in the United States. And the platform that James K. Polk uses is, I will annex Texas. And guess who wins the election? James K. Polk. So that groundwork has been set. Now, this is an international move. This is a sovereign nation coming into another nation with a treaty. Well, not all the world nations are in favor of this happening, right? Mexico is one that's not in favor, but England is also not in favor. Why? Well, if Texas joins the United States, you're going to have trade disrupted between England and Texas. And that's something they don't want to deal with. You also have that world power struggle happening.
So you have a lot of factors here. Can you give us the pulse of the average citizen at the time, the court of public opinion on whether to annex?
What'll be interesting is that most people want to be annexed. Why? The threats that are happening. There's a threat of Comanches. When you're in danger, you tend to think about your own safety and security. And bringing in the United States Army is a really positive thing for Texas. The economy is in dire strait. It's terrible. You know, Texas is basically printing money that it doesn't have anything to back it up with. So the economy isn't doing its best. You have two groups of people, those that want to remain a sovereign nation because of the hard-fought struggle, and then you have the majority that are like, no, let's go. And why? Most of the people that are dealing with the major issues and the ones that are in power are former Americans. They want to go back to what they know. And being on your own is really, really hard. They see joining the Union as a way of getting the support to keep going.
In early 1845, the U.S. Congress finally votes in approval of Texas becoming a state. From there, the ball is in Texas's court.
Immediately, the President of the Republic Anson Jones decides that we need to have a convention. So on May 5th, he actually calls for a special session to happen.
Of Texas Congress.
Texas Congress, in order to start the process. And then a convention is convened. And it's really interesting because he says this should be convened on July 4th. There's a reason for it, because he wants to show that he supports annexation.
This was all by design to choose July 4th.
Yes, it's a connecting of two nations. And how do you bring the common denominator in? Both nations fought for independence from another nation, and now they're coming together. And you do it on July 4th. While we're celebrating U.S. independence, you now are also going to discuss the annexation of Texas into this free country.
So the delegates vote on July 4th. What was the outcome of that vote?
It was almost unanimous. It was 55-1.
55-1. Who's the holdout?
A gentleman named Richard Back, who happened to be the grandson of Benjamin Franklin. He was from Philadelphia, and he had arrived on the scene. One of the interesting things about him is that he had left Philadelphia. He worked for the post office, basically, and some funds were apparently found to be not there. And he comes to Texas, and he settles in Galveston. He's the one person that votes against it at first, and then he will sign, making it unanimous. He is one of the older people in the convention. He's 61 years old. It's very interesting that you see this person say, nay, and then you read that a little later he actually adopts it himself.
But that's some drama right there.
Oh, yeah.
Not a symbolic vote against annexation. That's personal.
Yes, it is. And it is. There's a lot of drama. And one of the things that's really interesting is you can make a comparison to what happens in July of 1776 with what's happening in July of 1845. The delegates are going through the same struggles. But what the biggest struggle that they're having to contend with? Heat. It's a very, very hot summer, similar to the one that happened in 1776.
It's hot. It's a long, hot summer. People just want to vote.
They want to vote, and they vote fast. I mean, that day, they meet, they elect a president, who's Rusk, and the minute they elect a president, they have a vote. And the delegates are really interesting people. It's made up of a lot of people, and they're from all over. But of all the delegates, there's only one that's actually native Texan, and that's Navarro. And Navarro has to bring in a translator to help him. But they agree, and they bring it in. And you think about it, the majority of them were American. A handful had been in Texas prior to independence. It's a really interesting mix. There's even a few issues because there's a delegate that's not present. And he's not present because he has left to go visit a friend that's on his deathbed. And that's Sam Houston. His friend was Andrew Jackson. And he went to go visit him, and Andrew has passed away. One of the resolutions that the convention comes up with is that they must wear crepe armband in memory of Andrew Jackson for a month. You know, you're looking at the big picture, and it's like, wow, the delegates, they're so strong in joining the Union that they're still honoring a former U.S. president by wearing this armband.
Lots happening that summer. Even with this vote on July 4th, annexation is not a done deal. The people of Texas now get their say.
Yes, they do. And in October, there's an election. The election ends up being 7,664 votes to 420 in favor of annexation. They also do another vote that same day, and it's a ratification of the Constitution, because in order to enter, you have to have a state constitution. So you can imagine, July 4th, you're sitting there voting on annexation, and then the next day you start preparing for writing a constitution. It's not easy, but they get it done. When they get it done, immediately it goes up for vote, it gets passed, and it gets sent to Washington.
So the U.S. Congress, the Texas Congress, and the Texas people are all in favor. But for it to be officially official, two more things have to happen for Texas to officially join the United States.
It has to be ratified, and that happens. And when it happens, we are formally enter the Union on December 29th, 1845, 2 days after all the red tape.
On December 27th, President James K. Polk signs the annexation bill into law, formally recognized Texas as the 28th state.
And so when we enter, Texas continues to be its own country because, news travels slow. And on February 19th, the last president of the Republic, Anson Jones, will go out and he'll say a speech. And one of the things he says is, the final act in this great drama is now performed. The Republic of Texas is no more. The Texas flag is lowered, and we joined the Union. But one thing that many people don't realize is that when we started the talks on July 4th, plans had already been made to have the U.S. Army start coming in to help. And so they started arriving shortly after. So we haven't even gone through the full process when the U.S. Army is already starting its move. And that's a scary topic for the President of the United States, because you're sending troops, which you shouldn't be doing, into another country. And what are your constituents going to think? What are the opposition going to think? Are they going to turn on you and impeach you?
And we know one of the places they come is the Alamo.
Yes, they do. They arrive here. And so it's one of those really interesting periods in our time, which unfortunately many of us don't really dive deeply into, because we focus either on 1836 or 1846, and we skip that in between. And that's really unfortunate, because the Republic of Texas era is such a fascinating period in our history. It's a period in which a fledgling nation actually goes on its own and learns about the troubles of being on your own. It's sort of like that college student that goes off for the first time, and first thing you have to realize is credit cards, you take on debt, and how do you pay back the debt? Or you have to work, or you have, and in the case of Texas, you have to find ways of providing resources. And one of the really interesting things about us as Texans joining the Union is that we retain public lands, which is one of those things that others don't. Texas does. And why? One, Texas requests it, but it's also a way that we can help pay for some of that debt that we've incurred, because the United States is not going to do that.
Now that we know the story of the Texas connection to July 4th, what's your historic takeaway?
So July 4th, it's one of those things where all history is connected. And we tend to go back to important time periods in our history. And when we go back, you then recreate moments in that time. And so we were no different. So when you think about July 4th, a group of delegates are risking it all in Philadelphia to create a new nation. And who are these delegates? These are just regular people that have come together to create this ideal society, a society that's made up of people, for people, represented by people. They create a constitution that can be amended. It's a living document. That is a really interesting spark that changes the world, because most nations try to copy that. And it's an incredible thing, because it allows for a peaceful transfer of government. And July 4th, 1845, another group of delegates made up of common people meet to try to decide the fate of a nation, whether it joins the U.S. or not. One of the things that they come up with is a peaceful transfer of government. And so when we join the Union, it's peacefully. Unfortunately, it would lead to a war, but it's a peaceful transfer of government. So these things are connected. And who are these delegates that are involved in 1845? They're the descendants of people that fought in revolutions. Especially many are descendants of people that fought in the American Revolution. Like I said earlier, you have one that's the grandson of Benjamin Franklin. And then you've got that lone delegate from Texas who fought in his own revolution, who fought against Spain, who would later fight against Mexico, who then represents Texas. And one of the interesting things about Navarro is that on the records, he's listed as a farmer. He was a lawyer, but they put him as a farmer. Why? Well, he probably didn't articulate attorney in Spanish and someone translated it, but it's one of those things that all these people are common men that met to do something that was great. It made our nation bigger. It made our nation stronger.
Now for a little bit of a fun moment. You pointed this out to me, and I'd like you to point it out to our listeners. When you look at the U.S. flag, there is a hidden Texas flag inside it. I don't think it's by design, but tell us where it is.
Yeah, it's not by design, but it's really funny because, As Texans, we always joke about the fact that, we allowed the Union to join us. If you look at the U.S. flag, the last star on the blue field next to the 13 stripes, you will notice that if you were to box it in, it's a little Texas flag, meaning that the Union could not survive without Texas.
Ernesto Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Emily.
Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We've linked to an essay former Alamo curator Dr. Bruce Winders wrote about Texas annexation. We've also linked to a photo of an etching. It's on the Alamo's website, and it shows the final Texas president surrounded by crowds at the annexation ceremony in 1846. The Alamo podcast will be taking a break next week as we celebrate 4th of July. Don't forget to join us at the Alamo in person if you can next Friday, July 5th, for the inaugural Stars and Stripes Salute concert. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo podcast.